We should be praying against all these warlocks and wizards and witches and dark practitioners, praying against EMPs, speaking neutralization to chemtrails, to GMO frankenfoods. We have the ability to deal with all this stuff, but why are we not being taught to use our power and authority and our spiritual warfare? Because again, we have power over all the power of the enemy, it says.
This episode of the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Sam Johnston, where we are found on YouTube and Blog Talk. Nowadays, it feels like everyone has to be a part of some sort of group or some sort of movement, whether it's good things like prayer groups or not so good things like transgender movements or the transhumanist movement, or if you're part of both, the tranny-humanist movement. But either way, everyone feels like they need to be a part of something, and it's important to know what's at the center and what forces are driving those things. And today we are going to discuss the green movement, transhumanism, and important aspect of the prayer warriors and how they should be involved with such movements. And to do that, we are joined by the weekend vigilante, Sheila Zilinsky. She is a award-winning author and a famous radio host, and she's going to be diving into all different topics. So without further ado, Miss Sheila Zilinsky, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me on, and hello to all your listeners.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we could do that. You were a very highly requested guest, so I went out, and I'm glad that you were able to join us. But before we get started too much on the transhumanism and the green movement, can you give us a little bit of background on who you are and where you came from and how did you get started?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I was a former government top advisor, which is interesting because I worked for 7 years in the Ministry of Environment, which is equivalent to the EPA in the States. And I was approving a lot of federal regulations, mining deals, oil deals. Let me just shut this phone up. Shale deals, everything else. So we were doing sort of impact benefit agreements. And I had a chance to actually meet with the head of the financial ministry. And she said, it doesn't really matter if all this green gospel is a crock of crap. No one cares. It's big money. And that was really kind of my first turning point when I heard, literally, it would be like a senator or a governor literally saying, hey, we don't care if it's all crap. There's big money in it. There's billions of dollars in this new green energy. So that was kind of my first sort of deer in headlights moment when I worked for environment. And then, of course, as things progressed, I found more and more very disturbing undertones of this whole movement. And so now, as you can see, I wrote a book called Green Gospel. The New World Religion is a subtitle. And that's because really, this is I call it the green agenda or the green gospel. It's the greatest hoax of our era. And nobody really understands why this is the grandest of all tyrannical schemes. And, I say to people, imagine that everything you've ever been told about the environment was wrong. Isn't that shocking?
Yeah, definitely.
Imagine every single thing that you've been told. Imagine that carbon dioxide, what you exhale, was essential for life. And you know what? We would die without it. And that's the thing. They're trying to tax us for breathing. So think about that for a sec. A carbon tax, to me, is a fine for breathing. And so this is where we're sitting today. And yet, we see like Trump got really bashed for jumping off this Paris climate plan. But it really would save maybe, let's just say, it'll cool the earth 0.03 degrees over 150 years. And that's a big maybe. That's less than 0.0 of a degree. And we're talking about $100 trillion for this Paris climate scam, as I call it. And I really, so we're going to talk about this tonight and how this ties in with transhumanism, how it ties in with prayer. And we're going to kind of connect some dots and serve it all up with a big bow. How about that?
I'm looking forward to it. Nothing better than a show with a bow. So yeah, let's get into it. I know it's interesting to watch the green movement as it progresses throughout just the lies that they spew constantly. I remember when I was in middle school, which to a lot of people, I mean, that was not that long ago compared to a lot of people. But anyway, I remember Al Gore saying that the polar caps were going to be completely gone by 2012, and we were all done for. And now it's nothing. So how do transhumanism and the Grieve movement, how do they kind of interact?
Well, you just said a very important thing. None of their predictions are ever right. And why is that not disturbing to people that, all these sea levels are rising 20 feet by next week? We were told that New York would be underwater and all the polar bears are drowning. And now we find out from, even in Alaska, it's on record that polar bears are off the charts, exponential growth, a burst in populations. But yet these little freaks like David Suzuki, the hack that sits on the Al Gore advisory board, they're always running around telling us, we're killing off all the species. We're killing off the planet. We're, causing the great goddess Mother Gaia. Look no further than your Starbucks coffee cup, by the way. We're causing her to have a fever, and we have to act now. So this is the thing. Their predictions are all failed. Nothing is ever. In fact, I was stunned the other day. Did you hear this? I don't know if you saw this on the news. Maybe your listeners caught this. Climate activists were buried in snow at Davos. Trapped in ice. And I thought, wait a minute, like snowfalls are now just a thing of the past. We had the Independent say in March of 2002, Dr. David Viner said in 20 years, children aren't even going to know what snow is. I mean, all these failed predictions, these end of the world, doom and gloom, doomsday scenarios. This is what we're talking about. And scientists are now saying that global warming is now cooling the planet. Yeah. So you've got these insane arguments that are really, really, they're promulgated out there to make, I guess, the younger millennials, I mean, are they buying this stuff? Because I don't think any red-blooded American is buying this stuff to you.
It's either climate change or global warming. It depends what the weather's doing that day. But hey, if you don't believe it, you hate science, and that's the root of it, which I think is just ridiculous.
Well, I think you're right, because listen, that's another really important, astute point. Because what they do is, if you are they call me a climate denier, a climate skeptic, I don't deny the climate changes. I just don't believe that man is causing global warming. And see, global warming is just a trumped up thing they came up with back in the 70s. Maurice Strong and a bunch of guys got together at the Club of Rome and they decided, what would be the one doomsday scenario where we can get everyone on board? And that was this idea that what if we convince the masses that they were killing off the planet? I mean, think about how stunning that is. That's very devious. I'll give him that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes people feel bad for living, which if you look at a lot of the other plans, it kind of makes sense that they want you to hate living. So how does the Green Movement get us to transhumanism?
Well, okay, so that's a good question. So all this Gaia worship, pick your pagan goddess. I mean, Josh and Tom Horn, them talk about this all the time. The Maya, Gaia, the Dianas, the Semiramuses. Look no further, like I said, than your Starbucks coffee cup. Mother Gaia or Mother Earth is this great goddess. It's all the same pagan goddess. So what this is, it's a revival of ancient occult paganism that completely rejects Christianity. Well, what does transhumanism do? It's this idea, it's the biggest lie in the book, right? So you've got the biggest deception and the biggest lie of the book trying to sort of march us lockstep towards this idea of a one world government. A one world climate authority is actually what the Pope called for in a shocking, his 82-page climate encyclical, which I cover in the book, by the way. Good old George Bergoglio, a.k.a. Pope Francis, he actually told us that, listen, Catholics have to lead the charge in this cry to save the earth. So this is where this living harmony, with nature, this kind of cunning mixture of feminism, paganism, goddess worship, it ties into the transhumanism because we want to become like gods. If we can, it's the biggest lie in the book, like I just said. Satan told Eve, thou shalt not surely die. You shall become like gods. Well, why is that, being hatched, 2,500 years later? Isn't that a good question? So where the transhumanists sort of stop and the greenies, merge as well, is they want this one world authority. They want depopulation measures. They want to eradicate Christianity. Well, Ray Kurzweil has said on record, and he's kind of the ex-Google engineer, transhuman poster boy that's always running around saying Christians are the biggest impetus to the transhuman movement. And, for a lot, I don't know, I'm assuming all your listeners are pretty well versed in transhumanism, but when you think of actually engineering out the species, I don't understand why no one bats an eye. My book this year, I've got a new book coming out called Technogeddon, The Coming Human Extinction. And I really show how, we're going to actually phase ourselves out. And yet no one seems to bat an eye. They're not talking about this in the pulpit. It's crickets chirping the pastors are not talking about this. But yet we stand to be in a post-human condition in this fledgling state. I mean, how is this not the biggest topic out there? I guess that's troubling to me. But those are sort of the ways that these tie together.
Yeah, it's interesting when you see like the behind the scenes of the government is really focused on a lot of big projects involved with transhumanism. We have DARPA getting involved with all sort of things. The National Scientific Foundation saying crazy stuff like, oh yeah, we've already started DNA manipulation to, create H pluses. And it's really insane how real it actually is. And it sounds like sci-fi in a lot of areas is like, oh, we're going to create super soldiers, but that's not really the case, is it?
Well, no, in fact, it's kind of just a continuation of, think about what Sir Julian Huxley, he was a British, I call him a eugenicist. A lot of people say, no, he was an evolutionary biologist. He had a profound, like into evolution and this whole idea of natural selection. And he was a huge proponent of that. Well, now we're naturally selecting ourselves right out. And that's sort of what Huxley wanted to tackle, this whole subject of evolution at full length. And he really started this full-scale assault on humanity. And you'd really think the oldest lie in the book, the oldest lie in the garden, Christians would kind of stand up against that. But I think it's a very subtle movement that's happened over time. I mean, look at everyone packs a cell phone. Who would, our grandparents would roll in their graves if they saw that every single person is basically walking around with this handheld device. I mean, that is a slow, methodical, classic conditioning, isn't it? To go lockstep into what we're talking about. And then you've got a seeker-friendly, cotton candy comatose church that is duped. So, the Pied Piper pastor, they're lulling their congregants to sleep. So you've got, on one hand, you've got society like the AMC Walking Dead. It's the zombie apocalypse that are just dumbed down. And so this is the perfect thing to, march this thing forward. And of course, the Pope, we've got the British royal family. You've got people like Henry Kissinger. You've got guys like George Soros funding big chunks of this. So it's really a very sinister, diabolical, seemingly benevolent thing. Because listen, the cry to save the planet and go buy a smart car and be eco-friendly and carbon neutral, those are buzzwords. They all sound like, oh my God, I'm saving the planet. I'm such a superhero. But actually, they have no impact on these like the United Nations has a climate panel that put out these phony, bogus reports that, maybe in 10 years if we cut back on our emissions, but really these are not scientific reports. And that's what's really stunning is we going back to what you talked about before when people are labeled climate deniers. It's just like Donald Trump. Remember when he called for Obama's birth certificate? Well, he was a birther. So, they take these names and it's like George Orwell's 1984, all these little buzz names. And then pretty soon, oh, okay, that's what that is. Oh, that's a conspiracy theory. It's just saying, all these buzzwords. Who do you think comes out with all these words, right?
Yeah.
So they're really inundating the masses it's just like, I don't know if you caught the X-Files last week, but I was actually shocked. I'd love people to go back and watch that episode from last week. And so here on this show, you've got the Mandela Effect. They were talking about that. They were throwing phrases out there like build the wall, make America great again. They're throwing out these ideas like, again, the Mandela Effect. They were talking about chemtrails. They were talking about, just things that we talk about all the time. And they were mocking it. In other words, what you're having is some sort of this preconditioned, because once you just classically condition someone or precondition them to hear these buzzwords, and they don't bat an eye, oh, that's Mandela Effect. but it was a very mocky thing. Do you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I was really encouraging people to go back and listen to that episode because, again, they're starting to talk about these things in mainstream TV, aren't they? Just, more programming, more, it's sort of cognitive dissonance, isn't it?
Yeah, and even things like Taco Bell, their big new push is making fun of the Illuminati and how it's not real. And that's, to me, that's encouraging, because the fact that they have to make jokes about that means more people actually know about them. So they kind of have to step up their game a little bit, because people are starting to wake up. You see, Al Gore's new movie about climate change, it just bombed in the box office. So that is encouraging. Do you think that? Well, I don't want to fast forward too much. We'll get to the hope later. Let's focus on the doom before we get to the hope too much more. But I guess a question that I always run into when I study transhumanism is, because I don't want to hate on technology, because there's a lot of really good things that come from technology. And it kind of gets gray when you think about things like prosthetic legs or arms for fallen soldiers, and how that's kind of adding technology to your body, but it's a little different. So where would you say the line is when it's too far?
Well, I think the race to advance humankind has actually gone to me, it's a frightening new level. Yeah, it's great when you look at robotics and AI and genetic modification and nanotech to build, a new spine, for example. But it's always hidden under this seemingly benevolent guise of, well, we're gonna help your quadriplegic mother, get out of her wheelchair. And you know what? I have a quadriplegic mother and I had a paraplegic brother. So, I get where they're going with these kind of technologies, but at what cost? Humans are capable now of doing things they never even imagined would be possible 20 years ago. And the rapid growth of this trend is nowhere near its end. And that's what I say is, do these benefits of these massive advancement, do they come with a price? I think humanity is in danger because, I think the global elite, the who's who of the powers that be, whatever you want to call them, I think they do have a vision of a future. And I think they're going to employ these Promethean plans. And a lot of people say, oh, there he goes, brain, this is conspiracy 101. But really, why did it start back in the garden? This whole "you shall be like gods." Go look up Ray Kurzweil, what this ex-Google engineer is saying. You shall be like gods. This whole digital immortality, is it actually a technological extinction? Because if we're going to evolve beyond our limitations, they always say we're too fat, we're too dumb, we're too slow. IBM's got Watson reading 4 billion articles a day or something ridiculous. These things are supposed to be incomprehensibly smarter than us. So, we've got the Church of AI already springing up. We've got this emergent church, emergent technologies too, right? And that's where things should be being stopped. I believe the church is responsible for some of this stuff because the church is always supposed to be the beacon of the ethical compass and the moral backdrop to this. And it's like Charles Finney, the famed 19th century revivalist. What did he say? If there is a corruption in society, the church is responsible for it. And I really believe Finney was right. Why are we sitting around singing Kumbaya? Let's have a group hug. Well, we're marching like the Nazis to our doom. And this is a problem for me. So, obviously this is why we do what we do, to wake people up, right?
Yeah, definitely. I heard a stat today that there's like 6 out of 10 people are church dropouts, which means they went to church at one point and then they left for some reason or another. And it was a Christian radio station. They're like kind of baffled. They're like, well, how is this? How is this happening? It's like, well, because you teach crap and it's crap. And so, but no, it's important that the church steps up. And it's interesting when you talk about AI and the coming potential singularity. There's kind of a divide. People think that it's just technology, and then you have a spiritual component of it as well. Do you think that we can have true artificial intelligence, or do you think that maybe it's more of a nefarious spiritual activity involved?
Oh, I know that's really well articulated. It is that last part, a very sinister, diabolical, and I think it's very demonic. Quite frankly, a lot of people, they don't really like to go there talking about demons. It's not comfortable for a lot of Christians, which is actually kind of convenient, don't you think? And these very, again, seeker-friendly coexist. Everybody grab a bumper sticker and let's have a group hug. I think what this does is it just invites everything. no one bats an eye when we have 5,700 different genders now, when it was like 2 originally. We have all that. You said like tranny gender or tranny humanism.
Yeah.
I just, because it's comical. It really is getting to the point where we are just, it's like the Twilight Zone, and you can't wake up from this bad Twilight episode. I mean, we're so dumbed down, and the gospel's been dumbed down. And really, this whole thing is redefining what it means to be human. Yet, like you just said, all these people are just embracing this. But I really believe there's a demonic undertone. It's very nefarious, and it's going to be one of the ways that we see the Antichrist come to power is through this technology, whatever that looks like. I mean, who knows on the island of Patmos what John the Revelator was really, that vision. I mean, how could you know about an image of anything? We didn't even have images like a camera. I mean, think of an image on a phone. I mean, even basic things like that. When you study out the book of Revelation, how could John 2,500 years ago even know what an image is? So it's very interesting when you study that out in the Koine Greek. It almost seems to be like an AI kind of artificial intelligence. It's really cool to kind of look at, how the Bible is so, the Bible is more accurate than most newspapers nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a component. You talk a lot about the Genesis 3 and 4 with the fall of man, and then we can go up a couple chapters, and I'd love to hear how you think that the Nephilim and fallen angels, how do they relate to this transhumanist movement? Well,
I think there's 2 things going on here, and of course, as Steve Quayle has always pointed out, there is going to be a return of these giants. Giants will come back to fulfill my wrath, as scripture says. So, are we going to see the return of the Nephilim? Are we going to see some entities on the horizon? And this is my thing that I'm saying out there now. If you're not doing basic spiritual warfare and dealing with just basic demons, what are you going to do with these crazy entities that start coming on the scene? So, these are kind of the things that a lot of people think the fallen angels are. Again, we know the Watchers, we know the whole tinkering with mankind. I mean, that's why God flooded the earth out the last time, I mean, it was a very sinister, wicked transmography, which caused God to say, okay, you know what, we're going to redo this again. So are we looking at some antediluvian kinds of entities coming on the scene? Well, my question is, if people are not equipped to even do basic spiritual warfare, how are they going to handle these kind of things? I mean, this is a legitimate question, right?
Yeah, definitely. If you're weak, you're never going to be able to fight against an army of robots coming for your brain. But no, but it's real. It sounded scientific, and I was making a joke, but it's real. It's stuff that you have to watch out for. And there's some crazy stuff going on with DARPA and a lot of their projects. Have you done any research into what they've been doing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, DARPA, it was about 4 years ago, I really started getting to some of their AI projects. They're doing a lot of gene modification, a lot of biotech, a lot of nanotech, a lot of these new dust particles now. They've got, flu viruses that we don't even want to know about. But the other sinister, underhanded piece about DARPA is, they're probably 50 years in advance. Anything you think any technology you think is really cool, like we see this new Netflix series where there's a lot of new cool, funky technologies. I think DARPA is just so advanced research, right? Hence the name. I think they have projects that are so sinister. Probably, people go, oh, EMP and all these weapons. I think they've got some probably alien tech, let's call it that, because, ancient aliens are always telling us, oh, the stage is getting set for us to have our alien brothers finally come on the scene. Don't you find that interesting that we're getting a steady diet of this, preconditioning, our alien brothers. I mean, are we looking at a scenario this year of, say the Vatican, standing there with the United Nations saying we've met them? I mean, is this where we're going with all this? Are we getting geared up for this big alien arrival idea? Because that's all we see in the movies and themes now is that idea of alien technology. So I think you're seeing DARPA really play on some of those technologies that Hitler was. Look at the Thule Society and the Vril Society. Look at all these technologies that he was really into. So if that was back in the 1940s, where do you think DARPA's gone, another 80 years, right? Scary to think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, man, I forgot my tinfoil hat today because we are covering all sorts of the conspiracy topics today. Aliens, DARPA, oh my gosh. Okay, so let's dive into the alien world a little bit more, and because I still want to stay on the transhumanist topic, and it was kind of, it sounded like a little bit of a leap, but can you tie together the importance and how aliens will play into the world of when transhumanism and I don't know, natural selection of this natural selection, but really forced selection of transhumanism plays into our society in the future?
Well, I think it goes back to this Watson with IBM. I think people should Google that. Google, ironically, right? I mean, these sinister people that are already, they're really monopolizing on. I mean, we look at net neutrality. We look at, obviously, some of us conservative Christian sites are getting. Well, I know every one of my videos is getting demonetized by I call them gulag, by the way. That's my new thing for Google. So a lot of us, we look up these, whatever, Bing or these search engines, and, we're looking up different articles on, transhumanism, but it's always this very benevolent thing because we're just going to simply upload our brain into the big global brain, the big consciousness, and then we're just going to evolve like Watson. I mean, if that guy knows 786 languages and 55 ancient unspoken languages, 2 of them Aramaic, we could think about what Jesus talked about in Bible times and speak fluent Hebrew. There's all these, these very pleasant ideas where they would make it seem very palatable and benevolent and attractive to us. But actually, it's really against, it's to our demise, don't you think? Think about this for a second. Really step back and think about this. Human 2.0. I mean, we throw these words out there, but I think we do it so much that we don't stop and think, is this the end of man as we know it? That has huge ramifications because if we are saved by grace through Christ Jesus, I mean, we're mortal men. I mean, then does that mean post-salvation? Are we transmogrifying into something other than human? Redemption is for humans. So that makes me nervous too, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's Matthew 24, as in the days of Noah, so will be this coming of the Son of Man. So it's something that it sounds almost it sounds like it's going to come, okay? What I can't talk, get over it. So I guess what do you see? What are some real steps that you see coming in the future that will push us towards this transhumanist movement?
Well, going back to, you talked about there this alien idea of an alien invasion. I think that's a possibility. I want to go back to that for a sec because it's a really important part of this could really unite the masses, right? One of the things I noticed, I'm going to tie this into what we're talking about on the Grammys, for example. I noticed this real theme, like, we're all one, we all just want to embrace each other. And I thought, they're standing up for every kind of woman's rights or marching for all these women's rights. But, who's actually marching for the little unborn girls that are in the womb? Like there's 60 million babies that are butchered in the womb and nobody's standing up for their rights. So all these Hollywood hucksters, these Hollywood ilk, as I call them, they're running around with their big signs and their vagina hats, excuse me. And, these marches, where are the marches for the unborn baby or the pedophiles? And, so they're on this big thing where, you just have to embrace everything. And I think that is part of this alien invasion. I mean, I don't know what it looks like. I mean, we're not sure exactly. Is it all part and parcel of, because why would the Catholic Church make a statement, we're going to baptize aliens? And what is, and I mean, the world was shocked when he said that. We're talking about the Pope of the free world saying, oh yeah, we're going to baptize aliens. What kind of spiritual implications does that have when we are met by this other race? So whether we're getting geared up for that or prepped for that, I think it's totally demonic. I don't think there's such thing as aliens. I think it's demonic entities or some kind of entities. And I think it's all the big setup. And so that's what I think is really, it's kind of going lockstep with all the brainwashing going on coterminously. Kids are playing video games. I have 3 sons and I'm shocked. Every other day I find out in one of their video games, it's another name of a demonic entity. Why is there such this effort to revive the Horuses and the, these gods, Egyptian gods and goddesses. What is the fascination with that? You tell me that, you're a young guy.
It just because it puts it in a place in our mind that makes it so make believe that it could never be real. And then when you hear people on well-educated radio shows on YouTube talking about these things, it's so easy to brush it off. It's part of that brainwashing, like you said. And it's more interesting to bring up the Vatican, and they went farther than just saying they would baptize them. They said that if they had like a discussion with them and they found out that they were more moral, that they would convert some of their ideas to follow what the aliens said. It's just ludicrous that people can even still support a guy like the Pope who's been spewing all this nonsense. It's so I definitely see the Vatican playing a role in the coming transhumanist movement for sure.
Well, yeah, actually, I think he went farther, and I'm not sure if you can quote me on this, but didn't he also say, wouldn't we want them to baptize us?
Yeah, well, I don't. Maybe I'll have to look it up, but
I think he did. I think he went to that extreme, and that's a good point. He was talking about not just baptizing, but we would want to learn from our brothers, and they would be the morally dominant ones, not us telling them telling us. So, that's a very strange, I think, no offense to your Catholic listeners, but dear God, if you're listening to the Pope, you have some other serious problems, because this guy is an absolute nefarious huckster. He's saying things like, never mind about Jesus. No one, he was just speaking in, symbolic terms. The guy wasn't even really, the savior of the world. Throwing out statements that are shocking. Like, what do Catholics have to say about this? That's what, why in the media do we never see outraged groups of Catholics think the Pope's an antichrist type of, sinister character? Why are we never hearing about this? Because there's a lot of Catholics out there that are disgusted and fed up with the Pope. And why do we never hear about, all these pedophiles that are, this grope fest extravaganza like in Hollywood? It's all coming out, but what are they really hiding? And so it seems like when everyone's a pervert, no one is. They're just making us numb to this idea that everyone's a pervert, everyone's a sicko. So it's not that much of a step then to just think, well, they're into young girls, but now it's young kids and now it's young boys. You see what I'm saying? It's just a slow inundation over and over of just desensitizing people and making them numb to the fact that you've got all these perverts out there. But they're not talking about the child blood sacrifices, which ties back into the Planned Parenthood, the John Podestas, the spirit cooking, what kind of little ilk, this little diabolical mishmash was Marinka Ivanovich. What was she putting together, like sperm and menstrual blood, and probably the Planned Parenthood selling baby body parts? She was probably using that concoction too. Who knows what these sickos are doing? But this stuff is real and it's diabolical, and yet no one's talking about it. That's the frightening part of it.
Yeah, I would say though that more people are starting to wake up, and you see the alternative media movement is rising really quickly. You can see that with the growth of your show and a lot of other shows. I definitely see people starting to wake up and notice those things, which is really encouraging. But to kind of get back to the transhumanist movement and more focus the technocracy movement of how we'll interact with certain different aspects of our world. Have you looked into technocracy a lot?
Yeah. It's kind of, I think technocracy is really where we're at. You have these technocrats, forget socialism, Darwinism, Marxism, progressivism really is where it was at. And now it's just plain, it's all rolled into technocracy. So that is the global horse of, what do they call those big Trojan horses? It's what this whole thing has been since the 1800s. This slow, steady march towards absolutely technocracy, where the technocrats are controlling every aspect of people's lives. Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely agree. You see things, you do a lot of work on things like Agenda 21 and how that to me is a really fascinating real life example of how the government and specifically the UN is trying to push us to a place where we have to be involved with transhumanism. We have to be involved with technocracy. So can you give me some of your thoughts on what Agenda 21 is and what it means for our future?
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, do you want the short version or what?
The 20-minute version.
20. Well, the green movement really, it kind of originated, I take it back to Nazi time, but I mostly talk about, the last 60 years, the sort of one world government leaders of the British eugenics environmental movement led by Prince Philip, obviously Margaret Thatcher, science guru, Caspin Tickle, you've got Sir Francis Burnett. These guys were championing some of these eugenics movements that Sir Aldous Huxley, these guys, were founding UNESCO. They were pushing for the global warming fraud. This was the actual British Empire. This is things like the Fabian socialists were pushing these privately controlled international monetary systems. You see the Federal Reserve. I mean, so all this ties in together. And why did they target human CO2 as its ostensible cause? Because CO2 is the God-given necessary byproduct for human life. It's the natural and necessary industrial activity that sustains human life. If we drop below a certain parts per million, all the plants die and then we all die. But that's what these green hucksters are using to say, oh, listen, you, man, is causing global warming because of, and they call it anthropogenic global warming, which is just a fancy name for humans are causing global warming. The fact that you breathe out that deadly CO2, and this is what they actually did about, 10 years ago, they went to the government courts and they got it. The EPA got CO2, what you exhale, classified as a deadly pollutant. So think about that for a sec. So really, they say that human life isn't a priority for these people. Again, we've got to do something about all this industrial activity. But these megalomaniacs that are part of this Agenda 21, and then that was Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger and all these, depopulation has to be the highest priority of the government. So this is really what it's about, is it's a great way to depopulate and eradicate Christianity at the same time, because that is its biggest nemesis. So that's what I see as Agenda 21, really in a nutshell. And, you've got guys like Paul Ehrlich. He wrote a book with Obama's hand-picked science czar, John Holdren. They wrote a book talking about, actual putting sterilants in the water, sterilants in vaccinations, because they believe there should be a one-child policy. We got, as Ted Turner says, too many people using too much stuff.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of people out there, but it's crazy. If you guys don't know what Agenda 21 is, just look at it. Just do some research. It's not like they're trying to hide it either, or what their goals are. It's all about, moving us towards. If you think it's crazy, it's because it kind of is crazy, but it's real, and I would suggest people look at it. So where we're at right now in our conversation, Sheila, is transhumanist is coming. The end of the world is coming. Satan's coming. It has control over everything, and we have no hope, and I'm not going to end the show there. So what are Christians doing now to stop it, and what can we do better to prevent us from getting to that point?
Well, I like that. Christian has no hope. Actually, the opposite. I don't think there's ever, but when you look at, as you just said, we've got all this stuff going on coterminously. There's never been a time in history where we need to really look at the Word of God. What does it say? And the power of prayer, how does that tie into all this? Because, prayer is one of our biggest weapons against the enemy and the demonic hosts of hell. And this is what we're talking about tonight. This is Satan's agenda. This is the idea. Well, this is Revelation and Daniel coming to light, right? And there's never been a time in history when we can see all the signs. Prophecy is on fire right now. So why is it important? Like you just mentioned something like people are bailing out of their churches. Why? Because for the most part, we do have this seeker-friendly, emergent, let's not offend anybody, real, let's just embrace every doctrine of the world. They're not turning the world upside down in their churches. But the thing is, we have power and authority that raised Jesus Christ from the dead. We have the same authority. And yet Christians are not being taught their authority. They're not being taught their power. And in fact, they're just kind of, again, it's a dumbed down gospel. So they're not even getting basic baby food at this point. They're not getting the meat of the word because pastors are not preaching it. But wouldn't it be shocking to know, and I actually say this, I think, on the back of my book, Power Prayers, do you want to actually see results in your life? If God intended us as Christians to have victory, why are people's prayers going unanswered? And I drop a bombshell in this book, and I talk about this, I talk about this idea that prayer is when you guys are addressing God, and warfare is when you're addressing the enemy. And too many people are leaving that last part out. We have the ability to deal with the devil because we're not fighting flesh and blood. We're fighting against principalities, powers, and rulers in dark places. So, well, what do you think all these people are? They're dark people. They're obviously working lockstep with their master, Satan. And it's up to us as Christians to fight this. And where does that start? It starts in our prayer closets. It starts in our prayer groups. It starts in our home. We need to be, as Christians, I hate to make this crude analogy, but think about ISIS soldiers. Like, they get up every day and they are, they're going to do something that day to wage jihad. They're going to advance the cause of Islam, and they're going to do it to their full capacity from the time they wake up, from the time they go to bed. What if Christians adopted that same philosophy? I'm going to turn the world upside down for Jesus Christ from the time I get up to the time I go to bed. Well, why am I using that crude analogy? Because, you don't see anyone really turning the world upside down. We're commissioned to go out, preach the gospel, lay hands on the sick, seeing people miraculous, recovered. This is not, they might get healed. This is, you lay hands on them and they shall recover. This is, we should be casting out demons, raising the dead. How many, times have you seen somebody raise the dead this week? Why is this stuff not happening? This is what I'm talking about in my book, Power Prayers.
You heard it here first, guys. Sheila wants you to be more like ISIS, and that's the whole point of the episode right there. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, that's not the point. Jeez, okay. No, but yeah, you made a really good point about being prayer warriors, and I think the one thing that people mistake, especially people that are super involved with the church and they don't know their authority, is when they are trying to address the enemy or trying to take down the enemy with spiritual warfare, they address God. They're like, God, can you please take care of this demon for me? But you point out that you have to address the enemy, like, listen, Satan, get out of here. I'm not going to have any of your crap anymore, and we're going to take you down. And that's when you really feel the authority and feel the change. And so I think that's a huge point that you need to that people really need to understand. So what would be, let's give people 3 things that they need to change in their lives, 3 real life things for Joe Schmo or whoever is listening that they can do today or tomorrow that will change the world or change their life for Christ.
Buy my book. Hell came to my front door in order for me and my minister friend to write this book, because again, many people think that prayer warriors, that's a distinctive group. We're actually all supposed to pray. It says in the word James 5:17, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth what? Well, what does effectual fervent mean? A lot of people, think about this, you can go to a shrink your whole life. You can go to a counselor. You can have all these marital issues, problems in your life, be broke. But a lot of people don't understand these are things like generational curses that come down the bloodline. Doctors know this. They'll hand you a form and say, hey, did Grandpa Joe have cancer? Do you have cancer in your line? And people out there say, well, I don't believe in curses. Well, I say, well, do you call it a blessing? So the point is that, if someone tried to recruit one of your listening audience members tonight in a witch coven, these witches that are casting spells on front pages, no one bats an eye that the LA Times and New York Times mainstream news is talking about voodoo and hoodoo and hulu and witches and casting spells. If a witch tried to teach you your powers, your craft, your dominion, they would take you right tomorrow and you'd be probably doing spells the first week. So why are we not being taught our authority and how to take dominion? Well, here's the thing. We all recognize dark powers. Again, front page headlines talking about casting spells on Trump. But I've never read, ministers praying against witches, ministers casting, their own prayers against ministers returning fire. A witch is not permitted to live in the Bible. We can actually shut them down in 5 seconds flat. I suffer a witch not to live. Like, go look it up. So Satan's taken the very principles of God and used them for his kingdom. We recognize witches doing spells, but we're not even using our own power and authority. And I think that's disgusting. We should be praying against all these warlocks and wizards and witches and dark practitioners, praying against EMPs, speaking neutralization to chemtrails, to GMO frankenfoods. We have the ability to deal with all this stuff, but why are we not being taught to use our power and authority and our spiritual warfare, because again, we have power over all the power of the enemy, it says in Luke 10:19. So if we have dominion over all the earth, what part of that do we not get?
Some part of it, because we're losing it, and people just need to wake up. I definitely agree with everything you said, guys. It's so important to do your research, and supporting Sheila with buying her book for sure is a great way to do that. Sheila, we got about 10 minutes. Was there anywhere that we didn't get to cover that you wanted to head?
Well, I mean, I just want to encourage people, because you said something really important, and I take this very serious when you said, is there anything that can change people's lives? I am tired of hearing the same old, doom and gloom, doom and gloom. We get it. It's just very hard. But here's the good news. And I think that's where we don't focus enough, is we've got all this bad news. But Jesus really brought us good news, because you know what? At the end of the day, we're all kind of dead men walking. I'm not promised tomorrow. You're not promised tomorrow. The Bible actually says we're not promised tomorrow. The word says that, and Jesus actually talks about our daily bread. So, I want to encourage people to, why I think this is important as a life-changing book is because there's so many people that, tonight, for example, who's listening, the devil might be, kicking butt and taking names. Maybe the person is, maybe they lost their job. Maybe they have some kind of sickness, illness, infirmity that is robbing them of their, robbing them of life. A lot of people are suffering. They have, they're on all this pharmakia. They're hopped up on God knows what. My show is a little different because I talk about all this stuff, but then I think it's time to give people the solution. And we have a solution. We have the power and authority. And again, I think we're just so used to hearing that we don't even bat an eye when we say that. But we should be seeing the dead raised. We should be laying hands on the sick and seeing them recover. We should be able to heal a blind man, just walking up and doing as Jesus did. Those 12 turned the world upside down. And that's what we got to get back to, that Book of Acts model where we're seeing the world turned upside down. We're not seeing anything turned upside down nowadays. So why do you think people are jumping off the churches by the boatload? Because there's no demonstrative power and authority being done. I mean, that's why little young girls are getting into Wiccan, this Wiccan, and they'll be taught to cast their spells. But isn't it cool that, we have an inheritance? And, if I told your listeners tonight you have an inheritance, you'd be down at that lawyer in a heartbeat. And that's the thing. Why are Christians living so far beneath their inheritance, their privilege, what Jesus died to give them, to move mountains? And he shed every drop of his blood that we could be free and victorious. So why are Christians not living victoriously? Why are they affected and ill and sickly and struggling with illness and relationship problems and, just the devil's mopping the floor up with them? Because they don't know how to deal with the enemy. And that's really why I think that power prayers warfare that works is an absolute arsenal. It's an ICBM into the kingdom of darkness, because we're supposed to be SWAT team. We're supposed to be these tactical special weapons. We have them, but no, Christians are lazy. They don't fast. They don't believe prayer is doing anything. And so that's where I think it's at tonight. Very quickly, let's recap. What can change your life? Start getting in the Word daily. Start praying. Start fasting. It'll change your life. And get this book, because there's a powerful daily warfare prayer that will change your life. There's generational curse breaking, evil soul tie breaking. Everybody's got the stuff. It's time to, get rid of the stuff that's really blocking God working in your life, I believe.
Oh, man, weekend vigilante, no freaking kidding, man. You are just laid it out there. Get up and get active. If you're not pumped up after listening to that, then I don't know what's going to do it for you. Sheila, thank you so much for coming on the Sharpening Report. Where can people find you and how can they support you?
Basically, Sheila.media, just www.Sheila, SHEILA.media. You'll find the show information, the books, everything's linked there. It's kind of a hub. And yeah, everything is right there on one-stop shop at Sheila.media. And thank you so much for, we didn't have a lot of time, but I really want to encourage people tonight. Let's start making some changes in 2018, and you start putting God first, and he'll start putting you first. I guarantee it.
Yeah, definitely, guys, go support her, buy her book. I know you guys are like, oh, they're making me pay for information, then they're just out for money. Oh, shut up, okay? Everyone puts a lot of effort into making valuable products that will help your life get better and better, and it costs money, and it costs time, they gotta make a living doing it somehow, so go out and support Sheila and what she's doing. Go over to her YouTube channel, hit subscribe, and listen to her go on, talk about all many important topics. And guys, the world is changing. We can see that with box office prices dropping. Al Gore's video didn't do anything. We see movements about the Life March and how our president went to that. And we see the movement. We can see people rising up and waking up. And it's really encouraging, but keep doing it. Keep fighting. Don't go to sleep now because things are going better, but let's dig in deeper. Let's hold the ground that we have and take it to the next step because we have to do it and it's our mission. Let's hold off. I am under 30 years old and I've lived the end of the world like 6 times over now because of all their false predictions and whatnot. Listen, we are gonna take it back. We are gonna win. We are going to end up in heaven with Jesus eventually. So let's take our world back and let's get us back focused. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the show. I'm not gonna ask you to like, subscribe, or share, but I appreciate it if you do. You can find me over on YouTube or Blog Talk or on Twitter if you'd like. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the show and I hope that you have a great week. Do you have a favorite joke?
Yeah, I do have a cute one.
Really?
Okay, an elderly woman had just returned home from an evening of church services when she was startled by an intruder in the act of robbing her home. So the old woman yelled, "Stop, Acts 2:38, repent, which is repent in the name of Jesus so that your sins may be forgiven." So the burglar froze and was stopped in his tracks while the woman calmly called the police. After the officer questioned the woman, they cuffed the burglar, threw him in the back of the patrol car, and as they're driving to the station, the officer turned to the thief and said, "Why did you just stand there the whole time? Most robbers would have fled the scene, especially when all the lady did was yell a Bible scripture at you." "Scripture," explained the burglar. "She said she had an axe and 238.
Yay, like a first good joke. I'm so happy. Oh, that's awesome.